So for subscribers of my channel, this may seem like an odd video out of place, or maybe it doesn't. But for people who just stumbled upon this video, or maybe you searched out this video, thanks for clicking on the video. I'm making a video on this because I keep seeing stuff pop up, and today is the day of this Logan Paul versus Floyd Mayweather boxing match. And had been seeing previous to that, like his brother Jake Paul had some boxing match and is having another one, and just the fact that like social media influencers who have no real like previous experience in those direct combat sports are now choosing to partake in combat sports to create a like large influential money gaining event, which I think indicates that there is a growing interest in our culture and our society in combat sports. So we're talking like say boxing clearly, but like MMA, like UFC stuff, like combat sports seem to be growing in interest and popularity. So I guess I just wanted to make a video talking about them from a Christian perspective. This is totally just my opinion and my thoughts on the matter, but maybe taking a Christian approach to combat sports, and should we be watching and supporting these sorts of things. I guess maybe my first thought of the matter is that there may be like an objective and a subjective side to the matter on both sides, in terms of like a consumer as a viewer and as someone partaking in the thing. So say, for example, someone taking part in combat sports, like objectively, when we look at certain sports, because I may have to talk about like different sports here, because it's a different thing for like, if we're talking about like a boxing match is a different matter than probably an MMA fight versus like WWE, or even just like real like pro wrestling. There's different matters here, but like objectively, what is the objective of the sport? And for some of these sports, it's like to knock out the other individual. It's like to take them out so that they cannot get up off the floor, to beat them so violently that they are incapable of rising off the mat. Objectively, that appears to be this sort of like, that's not, to me, again, this is just my opinion, but to me, that's not so much like competition in sport, the way that like say a baseball game is like competing athletic ability and competing to score points in a certain matter, and like strategy and a lot of that kind of stuff. That seems to me that there's a pretty clear objective to the sport. To win the match, you have to like violently put down the other individual, which seems wrong. Now, I do think that there's probably a subjective part of that, to where someone who maybe takes part in mixed martial arts or boxing or something, that you may approach the sport with the mindset of going into it really just focused on like the strategy side of it, the competitive side of it, that maybe you're not going in with like incredibly malicious intent. Like you're not going in like, I'm gonna mess this dude up, I'm like potentially seriously injure this individual, and like they're life-threatening sports. Like combat sports have the potential for someone to die in the ring. Like it gets that intense. So on one hand, I think that there maybe is a subjective element to the individual taking part in combat sports, and where's their head at? Like, is there malicious intent to what they're doing? And I guess what I'm seeing a lot from the stuff coming up with like these social media influencers going into their like boxing matches or their fights is the way that they're speaking to one another is like with malicious intent, like saying stuff like, I'm going to mess you up, I'm going to knock you out. Like it may all be for show, but even so, like that kind of a language, that kind of like confrontational, that just, it's like they're having a fight. and they're doing it with the intent to like mess up the other person and cause harm to the other person. And in that sense, subjectively, from that approach, that to me also seems wrong. So for myself as a viewer, as a potential consumer of these combat sports, I am hesitant to support any. I hesitate even to call them athletic competitions, because if it's fighting for the sake of like with malicious intent, for the sake of causing intentional harm or injury to the other individual, that's just violence. That's just human beings being aggressive towards each other in a way that I don't. To me, that doesn't seem like something I ought to be supporting, because if I am, what is that? I'm supporting like violent, aggressive behavior. I'm supporting individuals trying to cause harm to one another, and from a Christian perspective, to me, that just seems objectively wrong. And subjectively, like for me as an individual, I may be looking at it as I'm just really into the storyline or the showmanship of the event. But I think if it all culminates to what's really going on here is two guys are stepping into a ring and intentionally trying to cause violence and harm and injury to the other person, I think that regardless of the way that I am perceiving and what I'm in it for, I don't think it's right to consume that kind of stuff. And obviously, I think it depends on the sport or the event. Like if we're talking about boxing, for example, the intent of boxing, like any boxer, and obviously I am not competitive in boxing, but the goal, I think, in the sport of boxing is to knock the other person down. It's like to punch them hard enough that they are lying on the mat. I assume that most boxers don't go into a match just trying to like avoid as many punches as possible and to land enough that maybe aren't like intentionally harmful to the other individual, but to land enough good strikes to get enough points to win on points. It seems to me that objectively, like boxing is about hurting the other individual. Something like MMA, like UFC in the octagon, it's like a mix of grappling and striking, and I'm sure that part of it could be they're just trying. Someone might go into one of those fights just trying to get the right hold on another individual to make them tap, but maybe release it right after. And it's a lot of like technique and maneuvering to try to gain the upper hand. But a lot of what we see, it's like anecdotally, and like what ends up happening is a lot of violence, like with the intent of like harming the other individual to the point that I win in the UFC. And in that case, that again seems far too violent and something that maybe is wrong. But of course, there's probably levels to this kind of stuff, like wrestling, like high school or college wrestling. A lot of that is it's like physical. It's very much a physical sport. But the intent, I think, objectively of wrestling is just to like score points and get takedowns. It's not to like cause harm to the other individual. But I think there's of course a subjective element to that as well. If you're going into a wrestling match and you're trying to cause harm to the other person, that needs to be approached. And if that's clear that that's something that me as a viewer cannot support, something like WWE, we'll go there too. I've watched WWE since I watched a lot as a kid, actually, because I think it's something that you cannot see anywhere else. And WWE is a super, like, the pro wrestling entertainment is just a very interesting thing because a lot of it is scripted in the sense of some of it's like planned, and really most of what it is, and the reason that I find it interesting is for the sake of storylines. Like they create these larger than life characters that do these like mind-blowing moves, and it's wild stuff. But that's like some of those moves and what they like get hit with, a lot of that's real. So part of approaching that's a tricky one, because people are really getting hurt, but the intent is to do it in a way that doesn't cause like life-threatening harm to the other individual, because a lot of it's sports entertainment. It's trying to create storylines and hit moves on people in a way that causes like the least amount of damage. Like it's one thing to like body slam another individual where they like land awkwardly on the back of their neck, and it's a different thing to like body slam an individual so that they fall like flat on their back in a way that like spreads out the impact all over their back, and it's planned. They're like professionals to do that in a way that they're working with each other to create a relatively safe environment, to create a product that appears to be relatively violent. So that one is that's a tough one to approach. And I think we can look at a lot of other sports too. Say football. Football is a very physical sport. It can be a very violent sport, but the objective of football is to like run plays and to score points, score touchdowns, or like a lot of stuff that isn't directly, I'm going to harm the other individual. Someone playing football might be a little messed up and think I'm going to like destroy the other person, like someone on defense who's with malicious intent going to tackle another individual. That's not the objective of the sport. So that's something that's wrong of that person to do, and it's probably wrong of me to support that. But overall, that's not the objective of the sport of football. And it's similar with that taking place in most other sports that I can think of. Hockey is an interesting one. I've never really been a hockey fan. And again, it's not really like a combat sport, but like when guys drop the mitts in hockey, they're trying to like mess up the other dude. That's not part of the objective of hockey. It's like to score goals and like skate well and run play and strategy and stuff. It's not to like punch out the dudes on the other team. So that's something that, again, as a Christian, that's just aggressiveness, human aggressiveness that comes from a place of like disordered anger that we can't really support. Now I will say, going back to, because I meant to say this, because like I have boxing gloves, as you saw in the thumbnail, because I think just like the technique and the exercise component of like throwing punches into like a punching bag or doing like boxing training is like effective training, and I find it relatively enjoyable. I wouldn't though feel comfortable like having a legitimate boxing match with another individual where I was trying to like knock them out, because that would feel just morally not okay for me. So there is a part of that too, where like if we were to do some kind of like combat sport training, but not like competitively and not with like malicious intent to compete and to fight against another individual, that's a completely different question. The question at hand is, should Christians watch and support combat sports? And this has been a lengthy video of me giving just a lot of opinion, but I think a lot of it comes down to what is the objective of the sport. And in some cases, if they literally call it a fight, then the objective is likely for two individuals to fight each other to attempt to cause intentional harm to the other person. And morally, I can't support that, because that is disordered anger expressed in violence to another person with the intent of causing them harm, which is something that I shouldn't be doing myself, and is something that like is wrong of me to find entertaining, because if I shouldn't be doing that, then someone else shouldn't be doing that either. So when it comes to these kind of events, and the more that they're being popularized, it's something that we need to personally look into. That if you are maybe attracted to these kinds of combat sports, to maybe look interiorly and ask yourself, and maybe go through some of these things objectively. What is going on in this sport or in this match or in this fight? And for me, how am I feeling as I'm watching this? What am I watching it for? Why am I potentially entertained by this? And on a broader scale, is this beneficial for me to be consuming this, supporting this? Because as these things continue to grow, if combat sports are the method through which like top level social media influencers are able to create an event to gain the most further influence and money, that says a lot about the direction that our culture is moving in. And that's not a Christian direction. It's one where we are entertained by violence. We are entertained by aggression and causing harm to other individuals for the sake of sport. And that's something that we probably need to address. Feel free to leave your opinions down below, because again, this is a lot of my thoughts. But I hope that makes sense, and continue to address those own things if this is an applicable message for you.